Hello, everyone. Welcome to another show of New Hampshire Citizens for Progress. Climate and the climate emergency is on a lot of people's minds. And we presented shows on wind power and solar and energy efficiency. And there's another means of being able to address this issue, which is the carbon cashback. And we brought a couple people in here today to discuss that with us so that we can understand what it is and how it works. And thank you very much for joining us again.
Thanks, Rick.
Yeah, thanks for inviting us here. I'm John Gage. I'm on the steering committee of the Carbon Cashback Coalition, and I'm the state coordinator of a national organization called Citizens Climate Lobby that's working to get a price on carbon around the world. And
I'm Marge Shepardson. I'm also part of Citizens Climate Lobby and also the Cashback Coalition, and I'm a retired state legislator, formerly on the Science, Technology, and Energy Committee.
The climate is changing. Extreme weather is disrupting livelihoods and food supplies around the world. This is observed. This is documented. This is the scientific community's consensus. The climate is changing. Carbon emissions are driving that change. Emissions come from burning fossil fuels. So if we want to slow or even reverse the change, we must lower our fossil fuel use. By charging a fee on fossil fuels and returning that revenue to households as a dividend, we can do just that, starting a chain of positive effects. Fossil fuels become less desirable. Cleaner sources of energy become more competitive. The dividend creates millions of jobs. Carbon emissions go down, reduced air pollution saves tens of thousands of lives, and climate change is brought under control. We can make this happen, but enacting a carbon fee and dividend isn't in our hands, it's in theirs. How do we sway them? What can we do? We can use our voices to express political will and demand action. We must help our elected leaders work together. It's on us to tell them what we want as a group. Because when voices call out together, their impact multiplies. Government can respond to the will of the people, provided we tell the government what we want. And what we want is a livable world. This is what Citizens Climate Lobby works for: to empower citizens to connect with and influence their members of Congress, to spread the idea that each one of us can address climate change. Bring your voice to citizensclimatelobby.org.
So can you explain to us what this carbon cashback is?
yeah, sure. Well, 3/4 of Americans are worried about climate change, and there's lots of groups in New Hampshire that are trying to do something about it. We have Sierra Club working to get towns to net zero by 2050. We have 350 NH working on getting rid of burning coal and preventing the Granite Bridge natural gas pipeline. And fossil fuels are throughout our whole economy. The idea of carbon pricing is putting a price on pollution, because when pollution is free, we get too much of it. This is basic economics. The economists are almost universally in agreement about what we should do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the most cost-effective way across our whole economy. And that's cashback carbon pricing. So the idea is we put a steadily increasing fee on the production of fossil fuels based on their greenhouse gas emissions. And typically we start about $15 per ton of CO2 the first year and increase it by $10 per ton each consecutive year. So you start low, but you grow predictably and steadily over time. Carbon pricing can be done with a specified amount like that, or it can be done in cap and trade way, which is what RGGI does. And it's politically easier to put a cap and trade system in place, but it's functionally difficult to make it do the job. So we prefer the more transparent carbon pricing method of cashback carbon pricing as opposed to a cap and trade policy.
Ever since we human reached something approaching more or less global consensus that it was carbon in the form of carbon dioxide that was by far the main driver of increased warming in our atmosphere, the concept of placing a tax on the production and emission of carbon has been widely debated. As far back as the start of the 1990s, the Scandinavian countries all implemented some form of carbon taxing or pricing in their economies. But despite this visionary world leadership, the rest of us did precisely nothing at all for at least another 2 decades. Even today, the average global carbon tax is a paltry $2 a tonne. Last week, though, the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, released a new study suggesting that if we're to stand any chance at all of keeping global warming below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels by 2100, then that tax would have to increase to $75 a tonne by 2030. So how on earth are we going to achieve that?
I'd like to tell you a little about how we got here, Rick, if that's okay. Back in 2007, there were 164 towns across New Hampshire that had a resolution at that time to do 3 things. 1, recommend New Hampshire towns set up local energy committees, which many towns did. 2, ask Congress to invest in research to promote clean energy technologies, which they have been doing. And 3, ask Congress to pass effective legislation to reduce carbon emissions from fossil fuels. And that one has not really happened. There's a lot of argument over what's the best way to achieve this. There's a lot of pushback, as there was from the tobacco companies and cigarettes, and now it's misinformation about climate change and the bad benefits of fossil fuels. So not much has happened in Congress in Washington. And that's why we're now trying another state resolution in New Hampshire telling our legislators that we want effective legislation to reduce carbon emissions. And this time, there's been a lot of research, and we know we can tell them the best way to achieve this goal is through carbon pricing and a rebate, or this cash back that we're proposing.
That's right. So Citizens Climate Lobby has been around for 12 years, but the economics is at least 20 years old about putting a price on climate pollution by charging fossil fuel producers a fee and rebating money back to households on an equal basis each month at the federal level. But 13 years ago, we asked them to do something about greenhouse gas pollution, and they weren't able to. So we're saying we want you to address climate pollution by putting a steadily increasing price on climate pollution by charging fossil fuel producers a fee and rebating all the money back to households.
And I like the fact that it's a market-based solution. We don't have to depend on government regulation. Once you put a fee on fossil fuels at the source or at the port of entry, then the assumption is it will be passed along to the customers throughout the system wherever you have fossil fuel products. But the beauty of it is the market is going to determine how that works and how quickly the price will become more equivalent with that of renewable energy.
That's right. This is the most cost-effective way to reduce emissions. You can look at regulations and subsidies and incentives as another way to try to correct the failure of the market to account for the costs of greenhouse pollution and the price of products. But they're not all-inclusive. They're specific at energy generation or transportation or burning coal. The nice thing about charging for the pollution at the source, where the fossil fuels are produced or imported, is you cover all greenhouse gas emissions from fossil fuels throughout the whole economy. And the price signal can start low with a guarantee of rising high in the future, because that sends the message to producers to make changes immediately. So burning coal is profitable right now, and there's groups trying to shut down the coal plant in Bow. But if we put a price of $20 per ton on carbon dioxide emissions from fossil fuels, the price of coal doubles. And that makes it not a profitable way to generate energy, and that shuts down the plant. So that would happen by year 2 in this policy. So
I know people have asked, how does this translate to actual prices that I'll see at the gas pump, for example? And putting a fee of $20 per ton is going to put about 18 cents per gallon on a gallon of gasoline. However, you won't be out of pocket that money because the money that's collected is not actually a tax for government purposes. It's going to be set aside and then given back to each individual, each household, on an equal basis. No matter how much you spend on oil or gas or heating fuel, you're going to get the same check as everybody else. And people can count on it. The lower 70% of us, low income and most of middle income, will get at least as much back, in some cases more, than the increases that they'll see at the pump.
That's right. And so this price increase each year is less than regular market variability that we see all the time. 20 cents per gallon can change. That can be a change that happens in a couple weeks. But right now it goes to profits of the fossil fuel industry in Texas or Saudi Arabia or Russia. If we cause the price rise and put it into the carbon trust fund and then rebate it back to all households equally each month, that price does two things. It's not going to go back down, so it sends a signal to the market to find other options other than fossil fuels. And we're making the money, not one of our international adversaries. It's going to households, and as Marge said, 2/3 of all Americans will break even or come out ahead. And so, whether you come out ahead or not is entirely based on your carbon footprint. So I've heard complaints that this is income redistribution or something. Well, no, it's not. It's just letting everybody pay for the pollution that they're responsible for and rebating the collected money equally, because you can look at it as compensation for the damages being done to each of us by the pollution. Who's being harmed more or less? Well, that's hard to say. So if you're looking at everybody in America, let's just call it even 1 share per adult and a half a share per child, because everybody can kind of see that that is a fair way to rebate the money back to households.
Historically, it appears to me what's been true is we've had these, whether it be energy or other businesses, that do not protect the public or the consumers that live around or use those services. And pretty much they push the cost not on the business itself that's creating this issue, but onto the public at large. So they get to enjoy the profits from their endeavor, and they push the negative consequences and the cost onto the public.
That's right. We're paying the increased health costs to our doctors. We're paying to clean up oil spills, and we're paying to clean up the devastation from these increasingly dire storms that we see. Storms, floods, fires. They're not paying that.
So it seems like a fairer way to attribute the cost of that business, that particular business.
That's right. And that's why economists like this approach so much. It's in economist speak, we're internalizing the negative externalities, which means negative externalities are the external costs of producing or using things that aren't seen in the price, but they're being paid by a third party or all of society. And so this is a market failure. The energy market right now is a simple, classic market failure. Free pollution is bad for society, and it's bad for capitalism. It shows capitalism can fail in certain aspects, which is why government intervention is needed to keep markets operating efficiently. When you have an efficient market, producers and consumers benefit, and nobody's being hurt.
We should talk about the state level. The Carbon Cashback Coalition was formed because while there's a bill currently in Congress in Washington, there's also a state bill that would address carbon pricing and cashback. And that bill came up last year in Concord and was retained and worked on over the summer, and it came back again, has been tabled. So we're trying to build support for both our state legislators and our federal legislators to understand that their constituents back home want them to vote for these bills. It will be good for our economy, it will be good for us in the long run and in the short run. So the Carbon Cashback Coalition was formed, and I think John was going to talk about that.
Well, so carbon pricing is complicated when you first start hearing about it. When you read about it for a while, it becomes quite clear, and it is actually a simple policy. And the coalition has created a website to help people learn about it. It's the carboncashback.org website. And there's a page about the policy, both at the state and federal level. There's a page about the benefits. Independent research shows when you reduce your fossil fuel use, you get great health benefits. This will reduce, at the federal level, carbon emissions 40% in 12 years, but mercury and SOx emissions 95% in 10 years. So the coalition, anyway, sprung from a couple people sitting around after a hearing about the state carbon pricing bill. We were excited because they just announced that it was going to be completely revenue neutral. The money collected was going to be used to pay for the administration, and all the rest was going to go back to households, which is what Citizens Climate Lobby volunteers want at the federal level. So there were several different climate groups. There was a couple state reps. There was a couple people from local energy committees talking about, boy, this bill is pretty good. We should figure out how to talk about it. The PEMI group said, well, we just got our town council to pass a resolution declaring a climate emergency. And we could do a citizens petition warrant article to endorse this state bill. And one of the state reps said, well, if you're going to do that, you could use that same text in multiple towns and cookie cut it. And I said, if you're going to do that, why don't we put a little text in there about doing it at the federal level also? Because that's, at the state level, you can reduce your state carbon footprint, but you can't affect global warming measurably. But at the federal level, in addition to the carbon fee and the dividend to households, you can use border adjustments. And border adjustments put that price of pollution on imports and take it out of exports to protect U.S. jobs from going to free polluting countries, and strongly encourage every other country around the world to match our carbon price. And the IMF, World Bank, and IPCC all say putting a price on carbon is the most important thing we need to do to address the big problem.
So this resolution has been already put on the ballot, the warrant, in over 30 towns. There are over 70 towns that are working on it, and so we expect that number to continue to increase. And if this is a start this year, but we have people dedicated to doing this again next year, so expect more and more people to find that they will have to be voting on this themselves in their own towns.
Yeah, and this is something that anybody who's worried about climate change can participate in. We've put everything on the website. It's in
CarbonCashback.org.
CarbonCashback.org. The template for the warrant article petition, a description of the policy in general, description of the benefits and the independent analysis that have been done, sample letters to the editor and presentations to do to your town council or board of selectmen. And so a high school student who's worried about climate change can become the town champion of their town. And we have several of our town champions are high school students that did this. They printed out the warrant article, collected the 25 signatures for their town, and submitted it to their town hall by the deadline. And now their town gets to vote on revenue-neutral carbon pricing. So this is an exercise in civic engagement. It lets anybody do something about the problem that actually has global impact. My theory about New Hampshire is we are ground zero for global warming. Governor John Sununu went to Washington and worked in the George H.W. Bush's administration. And that was when they kind of decided, instead of the White House effect taking care of the greenhouse effect, let's just let the market take care of the greenhouse effect. So 30 years later, we've discovered the market will not take care of the greenhouse effect by itself.
Because the market is broken. We are giving subsidies to fossil fuels and making them artificially cheap.
Yeah.
So it's not working.
So the warrant article has the state and federal carbon fee and dividend, or
Cashback has been, you're working on city, state levels as well as the national level. And other countries have taken steps in this regard. So what's been done?
Well, I'm glad you asked that. Over 46 countries have some form of carbon pricing, not all the carbon fee and dividend that we're promoting. However, Canada is one that had started with British Columbia, just like our states are trying to get started to push the national level to do it. British Columbia started with it and was very successful back in 2008. And their economy has been growing even faster than Canada's economy as a whole since they started the carbon fee and dividend policy. So since last April, all of Canada has instituted a carbon fee and dividend policy. And that's Premier Trudeau got reelected. He was in favor of this, and he got reelected. That shows there's a lot of support for it across Canada. So that's our next door neighbor, obviously, and we're going to be facing some border issues. If we aren't doing anything, it may be that they start putting a fee on our goods going to Canada.
That's right. Europe is talking about doing that now. A border adjustment, just how we would protect our businesses for the rest of the world and encourage them to price carbon. Europe is talking about doing that to us, and there are other trading partners that allow free pollution. So these 46 countries are pricing carbon. At some point, we are going to be forced to price carbon. The difference is in the jobs and economic benefits that the U.S. will see. If we wait 10 years to price carbon until we're forced to, China and Japan and Germany will become the clean energy producers to the world. Even right now, with a smaller economy than the U.S., China invested 50% more in renewable technologies than the U.S. did last year. So they're the ones that are leaping ahead and becoming the clean energy provider. So you can look at the carbon cashback method compared to other methods by comparing Canada and France. The yellow vest protests in France are because France, first of all, had a good price on carbon in a lot of their economy, but they tried to raise it.
Without giving the money back.
Right. They were going to, I think, reduce the deficit, which increased people's costs and doesn't help people, especially low-income households, adapt to that increased cost. So that caused major unrest because it was a very regressive policy. Whereas Canada's, they re-elected Prime Minister Trudeau because they're happy with the carbon cashback method of carbon pricing.
And this is because the cash that was collected in this process was given back to the people?
90% of it is collected.
In Canada.
In Canada. So Canada has different carbon pricing in different provinces and territories. So their carbon fee and dividend is the backstop measure. It covers half of the country that wasn't already pricing carbon in some way. So now they're fully carbon priced. And so can I just talk about the state level versus the
Yes, if
federal
New
level?
Hampshire could do this, it would really put us at an advantage. If when we finally get a federal bill, New Hampshire's economy will already be taking advantage of this whole system.
You think of what your carbon footprint is compared to another state's or country's carbon footprint when there's a carbon price in the market. The economies with the smaller carbon footprints will be producing at lower cost. They will be more competitive to the other states or countries, which is why putting a price on carbon at the state level makes sense. It has two benefits. The first is it lets Congress see that, yes, in the United States, we can price carbon using carbon cashback. And it puts us, it starts reducing New Hampshire's carbon footprint efficiently, and Congress can say, look, it's working here. We can do it too.
A lot of businesses have been coming on board endorsing this because they see it as a way that they can do long-term planning. They know what their energy bills are going to be in the future, and so that makes sense to them. And also, a lot of conservatives have been endorsing it because it's a market-based solution, not government. In fact, once it's working, you might be able to reduce or eliminate some current regulations on the energy market.
Yeah.
And economists, over 3,500 economists in the U.S. have written a letter last year saying that carbon fee and dividend is the best, quickest way to reduce fossil fuel emissions at the rate that we need to in order to avert the worst of climate change.
It's the most cost-effective and the most equitable way to do it.
For people, that's right, without harming the economy. And at the same time, we're going to have a chance to grow the economy because it will switch us faster to renewable energy. There'll be a need for more people working in the renewable energy market, and it will be stimulus to new technology development as well.
That's right. The Energy Innovation Act is the bipartisan bill that's in Congress right now, and Representative Andy Custer just became a 78th or 79th co-sponsor of it. So this bill, once it's enacted, will use carbon cash back with border adjustments, and independent studies have shown it will reduce emissions by 40% across our whole economy. It will create 2.1 million jobs in 10 years because spending enabled by the low-income households on food and clothing and housing and services grows jobs across the broad economy. It doesn't even count the new jobs from switching from producing coal energy to producing clean energy, and there's more jobs there too.
This is such a much more efficient way to reduce carbon emissions than to try to do it through regulation. I know programs like RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative that we're part of in the Northeast, is a regulatory effort. It has brought emissions down some, but the price is way too low to have the kind of market effect that we need. And so if we can switch to this carbon cashback initiative, it will be much better. And it won't be just the electricity sector either. It will cover transportation and home weatherization efforts. It will cover everything.
RGGI was a good experiment. It puts a $5 per ton of CO2 price on fossil fuels that are used for electricity generation, which is about 20% of New Hampshire's fossil fuel use.
But it's cap and trade.
And it doesn't have the power to push that price anywhere outside of the RGGI states. And it doesn't have the power to go much higher because it raises people's prices, and the money is being spent in most of the states on efficiency and things. There's complementary policy to pricing carbon, and those are important to do too. We need to invest in basic research and efficiency and CAFE standards, but carbon pricing is the most powerful lever we have to reduce emissions, and we can do this and the other things with money from other places.
So
the Energy Innovation Act is a bipartisan bill, and we need the staying power for climate policy that you get with a bipartisan bill because it has to last for decades. Depending on election results, if both parties support the bill going in, it will be there for the long haul.
I'd like to emphasize the fact that we still need to do all we can to reduce our demand through energy efficiency, weatherization of buildings and so forth. We still need to keep working on electrification of vehicles. We still need to keep working on development of renewable energy technologies. All these things are important and helpful, but as you said, they're not going to get us where we need to go. We need to add the tool of carbon pricing. Right. It alone will reduce our emissions by 40% in just 12 years, as you said.
And when there's a price on carbon around the world, the countries that are the most energy efficient and have the lowest carbon footprints are the most competitive. We want to be that country that leads in the clean energy transition of the world. It's trillions of dollars in business to be the clean energy producer as the world shifts over the next few decades to clean energy. The U.S. has the potential, but with a broken energy market, we're not going to beat China to getting there.
Go to carboncashback.org to find out all about this.
That's right.
And learn more. Learn how to be a climate champion for your town.
There's one more thing people can do right now to ask Congress to pass their bill.
So there's many steps you're able to take in pursuing this and reducing the amount of carbon, whether it be through these sites or being a champion and getting the legislation submitted at your local city and town. Well, I want to thank you very much for joining us. I want to thank all you at home for watching another show. Hopefully you'll tune in next time, and take care. Be well. Thank you.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.